All right, greetings, computer science enthusiasts, and today we're going to talk about variables. So variables allow you to change or modify the value of something that you want to use. For example, in a square program, you have to have the length of your sides. You're drawing a rectangle and you tell it, oh, I want it to be 20 by 20. You could put X in both of those slots, and then you could change the value of X, and that would change the value of the size of your square. So variables have a very important use in programming. So what we're going to do to illustrate that is I'm going to create a program from 3.6 that simulates the dice roller. So we're going to create a program that will simulate the rolling of two dice, like you would find in a Monopoly game or Yahtzee or something like that. And then our program is going to add those two together and tell us the sum of the two dice as well. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a variable that's going to represent the first die that I roll. So I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to go down to the variables section, and there's a bunch of options here. You want to pick the one that says var something. That's your declaration that the word that you're about to use is a variable, and then has an equal sign in it because I'm getting ready to assign a value to that variable too. So this is called a declaration and an assignment, or sometimes a declaration and an initial value is given. This is always good to do when you're creating variables until you get to where you're object-oriented programming, which is way down the road. You want to make sure that you assign a value to any variable you create. So I'm going to call this variable first underscore die. And a lot of times you use underscores to represent a space. There's actually two schools of thought. You can use an underscore like they do in Python, or you can do what's called camel case notation like Java and JavaScript use. I do a lot of programming in Python, so you'll probably see me use the underscore a lot. So the first die, let's just say right now the first die is always going to be 3. All right, so I have now created a variable with this title and assigned it this value. What does that do when I run the program? Well, I'm going to go over here. By the way, you might have noticed that I drug my console up a little bit so that my console is not just sitting on the ground here. But and so if my console was all the way down here, I can't even move it all the way back down, but I wouldn't be able to see what I want. I've got some stuff that's going to display here because I'm going to use this console.log here in a second. And so that I can see my number inside this thing here without using the quotes, I'm going to type in first underscore die. And so now when I run this program, whatever my number is will display right here. So my number was 3. So that variable has a value of 3 in it. And so when I say, hey, display to the console that variable value, it displays out 3. How do I get the words to display out? Well, that's the difference between a string and a variable. So if you enclose something in quotes, this is a string. More precisely, it's a string literal. I'm literally wanting you to print out this word. And if you don't enclose it, then it looks at it like it's a variable. And so that's why sometimes when you're just typing out stuff and you want something to print, but you don't put it in quotes, when you run it, you get this error because it can't figure out that you wanted to print out the word lunch because you didn't put the word lunch in quotes. And it goes back and it looks up in the program to see if there's a variable called lunch. And if there's a variable called lunch, then it could use that. So that's why when I type in here, first die without putting it in quotes, I don't get an error because I have created that variable. All right, so this kind of starts out exactly what we want to do, except I don't really just want the die roll to always be 3. I want it to be some random number between 1 and 6. So how do I simulate that? Well, I think I'm going to go into the math and I'm going to look at what our options are. And sure enough, if you scroll down here to the bottom, you'll see down here something called random number. and it'll let you generate a random integer between the two values you put in there. So it accepts parameters. So I'm going to just stick this right in here, and I'm going to generate a random number between 1 and 6. So what this program will now do is it'll generate a random number between 1 and 6, and it'll assign that value to the variable first die. And then when I ask the console log to print what's in first die, it'll print that number. So we can see our number being generated. So see, our number was 2. If I rerun it, our number was 6. If I rerun it, our number's 5 and 4 and 1 and 6. I haven't gotten a 3 yet. Let's run it until I get a 3, making sure that I can generate. There we go. They're making sure that I generated all the possible random numbers. Normally, if I were testing that, I'd probably write a program that would do this 100 times, and then I could make sure, within 100 times, I should get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 out there somewhere. All right, so this is working exactly like I intended. Part of the iterative designing process is you test as you go. I've created a variable that assigned a random number. I'm able to print that out to the console. However, the directions were a little bit more in depth than this. They didn't just say print out the number that you rolled. They actually said identify it. So I'm going to create a phrase, the first die roll was, and then I'm going to have it print out that die roll. So once again, that's something that is going to print out to the console log. However, I need to have a way to put in two different statements at the same time. I want my quote, and I want the variable to print out. And so in math, in the math section, we've got this little plus object, and not only will it add two numbers together, if I put 2 and 3 in there, it'll print out 5. See, right here it prints out 5 because 2 plus 3 is 5. But if I put a word in here, hey, and then I put hey plus 3, what it'll do is it'll put the word and the number right next to each other, and it'll treat it like a string, hey 3. And I can even make a second word over here, and it'll combine the two words into one whole string. And in fact, if I put a space at the end of the first word, it'll put a space in between those two words when it combines it and runs it. So that's called concatenation. And so what you can do with your output here is you can have a string, and then you can have your variable. So if I put in this second box here, if I get rid of these quotes and I just put in first die, then it's going to print out whatever random number was generated. And then if inside the quotes in this first box here, I put the first die roll was, and then put a space, maybe I'll even put a colon here and a space. Now it's going to concatenate or combine this string with this number and put it out as all one long output. So that's one of the ways that you can use these things. It says the add operator adds two numbers, but it also will add words together as well. Now it works a little bit different because you're not creating a sum of words, you're just stacking the words together into a big long word. All right, so I'm going to reset this and I'm going to run it to test it, and sure enough, down here I got the first die roll was a 1. So that's exactly what I want to happen. Now, will it always be a 1? Hopefully not. Let's go ahead and rerun the program. Nope. The first die roll was a 5. So now I've got a way to generate the first die and to print it out. How do you think we're going to do the second die? I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to go to variables, and I'm going to click in variables, and I'm going to put second underscore die. And I always like to use variables that are very, very descriptive, because that helps me remember later on in a program what I'm using that variable for. And it really kind of helps you keep your program kind of together and make less mistakes, especially when you're writing programs that are long and I want to be scrolling down the screen and I won't be able to see at the top of the screen what I initially called the variables. So if you make them very intuitive, not only does it help you, but if somebody else is looking at your code and evaluating your code, it'll help them out as well. And then, I'm going to do a trick. So I want to copy all of this command over. So I'm going to go over here to show text, and I'm going to change this to JavaScript. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this line right here, and I'm going to hit Control C, and then I'm going to hit Control V. And that copies that line over. And now I go back to show blocks. And now basically I've just duplicated this first block. But the only thing I want to change is I don't want the first die, I want the second die. And then I don't want first die as my variable name, I want second die. So that was just kind of a shortcut so that I didn't have to type all of that stuff out again. And then now, if we go ahead and reset, now it ought to roll 2 dice for us and show us the numbers that they roll. So the first die roll was 3, the second die roll was 5. You can see that down here in the console. All right, so now the last thing I need to do to represent summing up those things is I'm going to create a variable called sum. Sum is going to add those 2 numbers together, and then I'm going to print out to the console log the added numbers. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to grab another variable tab. This variable tab is going to be called sum. And now what I'm going to do is sum is going to add first die and second die. And then the console log is going to be a combination of the words, the total of the dice is, and then I'll just print out what's in sum. So now I've created 3 variables. I probably should go ahead and put this stuff in quotes. I noticed over here there was a red box, and so it's looking at all of those things and saying, hey, that's going to need to be in quotes there, my friend. And so I'm going to quote that and put some quotes over here. Now I don't have the red box anymore, so I can already start troubleshooting my errors by looking over here. So now when I reset and run this, down here at the bottom in the console area, you see the first die roll was a 3, the second die roll was a 1, and the total of the dice is 4. And if I run it again, I should get 2 different numbers, and it should add them correctly. So 3 and 6 is 9. So there you have a very simple die rolling program that illustrates how you can work with variables to produce a result. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found this informative, and I hope you keep exploring your passion for computer science.